I think you should have every time you get up in the morning, your heart should be in your mouth, and you should be motivated to go forward. It shouldn't be a comfortable life. There should be good reasons for wanting to get a move on with things. So, sort of divine restlessness, I think, is probably the best state.
Divine. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Masterclass by Presidents Summit, where we will address growth versus value. What's the best way to build the new age, new era advertising and marketing services model? With us today, we have none other than founder and executive chairman of S4 Capital and founder of WPP, Sir Martin Sorrell. Thank you so much for being here, Sir Martin. It's an absolute pleasure having you.
Good to see you too. Although the technological the labyrinthine somersaults that we had to do on the technology was extraordinary. I recommend that you use Zoom and forget about everything else.
We'll certainly take that into consideration.
Take it to heart. It's as good as it gets.
Yeah, certainly. Well, thank you at least, Sir Martin, for being here despite the challenges. Thank you to all the 1,000 attendees tuning in from around the world. Please do let us know where you're from. My name is Frederick. I'm the CEO of Presidents Summit, and I'm so pleased and excited about this masterclass. Just to briefly outline the format, we'll go for around an hour. We'll have me and Sir Martin will address some questions in regards to the best way to build the new age, new era advertising and marketing services model, as along with some of Sir Martin's most valuable leadership lessons and invaluable experiences that you've collected over your incredible career. At any point in time, all of you guys are more than welcome to ask any questions you might have in the Q&A section. Please share your viewpoints in the chat section as well, so we can get as much of a dialogue as possible during this very, very challenging time. I want to say this is one of the masterclasses that we're doing. We have many more coming up. Tomorrow we have the former CEO of General Electric, Jeff Immel, coming. We have Luke Nosek, the co-founder of PayPal, Julian Treasure, the most new TED speaker, and many, many others. So make sure to tune in for those as well. Otherwise, let's get to it. I hope you're as excited about this as I am. I hope you have grabbed your notebook so you don't miss any of these amazing and upcoming insights. So Martin, I briefly introduced you, but you were the CEO of WPP for 33 years. You built it to the world's largest advertising and marketing company with over 200,000 employees, with revenues over $20 billion when you left. And 2 years ago, you then embarked on a new journey. You founded S4 Capital, which today has surpassed the market capitalization of over £2 billion, which I think speaks for itself. So again, Sir Martin, welcome. I hope everything is well.
All fine.
So Martin, it's needless to say that you know a thing or two about building companies. One of the many things that you have been amazing at doing is merging companies. So let's start off by addressing this topic, because throughout your career, you've done quite a few mergers, both during your time at WPP, but also now with S4 Capital. For all the business leaders on this masterclass, can you enlighten us just into what are some of the key traits that you're looking for when doing mergers with companies?
Well, you used the phrase mergers, and so I guess I would characterize the two previous companies I were with, that would be Saatchi's and WPP, as more involved with acquisitions rather than mergers. Mergers implies different things. I mean, acquisitions, the model at Saatchi's and WPP was very much what I call a market share model. I draw analogies always to detergent business at Unilever or Procter & Gamble. You launch a detergent, or you have it, or you might acquire a detergent brand, and you accept there will be some cannibalization to your existing business, but you accept it because you'll build market share. So it's very much a market share model. Also, the parameters, the total shareholder return parameters behind a WPP or a Saatchi are different. Those were the days when not only revenue growth but margin played a part, probably an equal part. So probably analysts, institutional investors placed about half the weight in terms of total shareholder return on revenue growth, like-for-like sales growth, and half on margin. Whereas in the model at S4, which is more of a merger model, i.e., we basically say to people, first sentence of every discussion that we have, and it's not just about mergers, it's about organic growth primarily, but beyond organic growth, there's inorganic growth or growth by merger. The first sentence of the conversation is, if you want to sell your business, we're not interested. If, however, you want to buy in or sell in to our model or our mission, which is to create a new age advertising and marketing services model, you may well be for us. And there's a secondary mission, which is to disrupt the old. So on the day that Tesla joins the S&P 500, to use a very grand example, I mean, Elon Musk is disintermediating, disrupting the traditional automobile business. I think probably his market capitalization at 430 billion, whatever it is, surpasses the combined market capitalizations of most of, if not all of, the auto manufacturers. So what we're trying to do on a much smaller scale is do exactly the same, but within the advertising and marketing services. That demands a different model. It demands people, I mean, the base of our consideration for mergers is half shares, half cash. So what we're saying to people is, it's perfectly acceptable for you to roll over half of your consideration in cash, but the other half, you buy into our concept, our mission, and there is something. There is missionary zeal here. There is a desire to change the landscape. So there is a missionary basis to this. There's a passionate basis to this. It goes beyond money. With the acquisition model, often in the case of services businesses, based on earn-outs, because that's probably the best way to buy service businesses, because they depend on the assets walking in and out of the office, if there is an office, or at home. It depends on those human assets to an even greater degree than in the case of the merger model, I guess. But in that case, you're basically buying the business, and the earn-out model is a good way of doing it. What it does do, however, is encourage greater fragmentation. Our merger model at S4, we have 4 principles: digital only, the holy trinity of data driving digital advertising, content, and programmatic. Faster, better, cheaper is our mantra, how we go to market. And last but not least, it's a unitary one P&L model. We want, if I was going to draw, again, grand examples, if you said to me, who are the best professional service firms, I would say they're probably McKinsey and Goldman Sachs. They have a unibrand. They are one brand. They go to market as one. And their people work together probably more as one than, well, not probably, definitely more as one than a more fragmented market share model. So very different models that have developed. The market share model in the advertising and marketing services industry was not the preserve of WPP or Omnicom or Publicis. It was the preserve of Marion Harper in the 1950s. He started with Interpublic Group, and Interpublic Group then had McCann's, it had Lintas, and it had other agencies. It was a collection of agencies. And the constituent parts of WPP, JWT Group, a journalist rang me up or sent me an email a couple of days ago doing an article on JWT and Wonderman. Yeah. And was focused on JWT and talked about JWT as being the entity that we had bought, as he put it, in 1987. It's nonsense. I mean, the journalist is not a particularly good journalist and doesn't dig into things very well, as many journalists, bless them, don't. But they're more interested in the instant article rather than the decent amount of detail. But JWT Group consisted of the Walter Thompson Agency, Hill and Knowlton Market Research Bureau, which became part of Kantar, and within the JWT agency was what became Mindshare. It was the JWT piece of the media planning and buying business. So So, but anyway, the groups, JWT, Ogilvy, Y&R and Gray, all of which became part of WPP, were all mini WPPs building a multifunctional, multi-agency model. And that market share model is no long, in our view, fit for purpose, and past its sell-by date.
That's very interesting. And I know that it's, again, a completely different focus you have now. And you also, I think, is it 8 people like in your top management that make sure to meet up every day to really facilitate
we meet up every day. We met today, for example.
Yeah.
And we meet every day. That was driven by COVID. I mean, before that, we used to meet every month for about 3 or 4 hours. We now meet. We continue to meet every month to review where we are every month. But we meet every day. Today it was for about 30, 40 minutes. And we had 6 of the 8 on. One had a doctor's appointment, and one was negotiating a very exciting new contract for us. But I think basically we meet and we talk about people, because driven by COVID, obviously, and we have a few cases of COVID at the moment, but not many. We have a younger profile than most. So on the media side of our business, about 600 people. The average age is about 28, and on the content side of the business, which is about, I would say, 2,400 people. We're about 3,000 people now, 2,400 people on the content. The average age is 32. But so naturally, I think because of the nature of COVID, thankfully, we have less cases. I think today, as of today, we have about 3 or 4 possible cases, but we've been very fortunate. We've had people who have caught the virus, that have recovered, and sadly, their family members, parents, or family members have suffered. So we suffer. But I would say we've been disproportionately fortunate. And when we're in 30 countries around the world, 70% of our business in North and South America, 20% is Western, EMEA, and Middle East and Africa, and 10% is in Asia Pacific. So if you look at the dynamics of it, it's quite interesting. In essence, we should have suffered a little bit more than we have done, but I think that's because of the nature of our workforce. So and we're very on the remote working, and our people handle it brilliantly. Anyway, we talk about people every day. We talk about clients, obviously, and the latest developments in clients, good and bad, and we talk about our finances. Because obviously, when COVID hit in really last 2 weeks in March, which was the big stasis, the big when we most felt it, we haven't had a down month this year. Our lowest month was +3 in June. Our highest month was +33 in January before COVID hit, and our last month was +25 in September and +24. In August, and in July it was +18. So we had a strong Q3, up 23%, which compares very favorably to the ad holdcos in the market, who are down 5 to 10% in Q3 and down 10 to 15% in 9 months year to date. So our margins probably have held up, actually. I mean, we had a first half where we invested. Interestingly, we invested in the first half in people. Our headcount, actually, on a like-for-like basis in the first 9 months was up 26%. The first 6 months we were up 22%. So we continued to invest whilst the ad holdcos were discharging. I think, according to Forrester, they're going to fire, sadly, 50,000 people. So on average, that means about 150,000 people in the world, 3 dependents per family sort of thing, or 3 people per family. That means about 150,000 people are going to suffer directly as a result of COVID and its impact on the advertising and marketing services industry, which is very sad news. So, but by and large, our people, our top 8 people, and all of our people have responded very well. Working from home, dispersed living, dispersed working, more flexible working, more flexible commuting, all those things play to our strengths. not to our weaknesses. I mean, I find it somewhat amazing that the number of CEOs that here, particularly in our industry, who congratulate themselves, for being able to work from home and dispersed working and flexible working and agility is first nature to our people, and an essential attribute, I think, to any company.
Absolutely. Well, Sir Martin, when you then do all these mergers, obviously there's a lot of cultures coming in from left and right. How do you ensure that red thread between everything that you do? Do they merge their culture into S4 Capital? Do you make sure that they stick with their own culture? How much of the management do you sort of keep around? What is your thinking?
I think, with all due respect, people such as yourself like to complicate these things. I mean, the culture when you see it. It's rather like ESG. I mean, I applaud all the aspects of ESG, but I don't applaud all the trappings that go with it, and the over intellectualizing of it, and the over sophistication of it. It's very simple on ESG. If you're in business for the long term, you're going to do right by all your stakeholders by definition. If you're in business for the short term, then you won't. You'll invest in people for the long term. You'll invest in your capital equipment for the long term. You'll invest in all the stakeholders you have to deal with for the long term if you're going to be there for the long term. If you're in and out merchant, you won't. Now, in relation to cultures, I think that's overcomplicated too. We know we broadly have two practices: one around content and one around data and analytics and digital media. The cultures of in your definition, or your implied definition in your question, the cultures of media monks around which we built the content practice, and we brought together seven different companies for that, and then around Mighty Hive, around data and digital media, another 7 around Mighty Hive. I think the people, the principles in all of those companies, whether they be on the content side or on the digital media and data and analytics side, share, again, using your word, the same culture, the same values, mission, and approach. Maybe slightly different in terms of emphasis, but by and large, when we get involved, I mean, the first cultural similarity is what I said before. If you want to maximize the sale price on your company, don't come and talk to us. We're not interested in people selling. Yeah. We're interested in buying. And if culture is determined by your fundamental purpose, our fundamental purpose, as I said before, is to create the new age, new era model, advertising and marketing services model, and disrupt the old. Now, so the cultural glue, or the missionary zeal, which I prefer to put it like, that brings us together, is that the belief that this model, built around data, which informs creative content, digital creative content, and informs by the data and analytics, the digital media, that's what binds us together. So that's the cultural glue that makes people willing to merge their businesses with us and share the same mission and the same vision. So I think one of the problems that larger companies face is that they become not overcomplicated structurally, but necessarily, because I think sort of neatness and simplicity is the hobgoblin of small minds. You see a lot of management by spreadsheet at the moment. You see a lot of people combining things because it's convenient for them to do it. Then they can sit in London or New York or Paris, wherever it happens to be, and it's much simpler for them to think about the business. But sometimes necessarily businesses are messy. You have to make compromises. Things aren't black and white, particularly in the services businesses, actually. So it has to be, the structure sometimes has to be somewhat messy to deal with it. But coming back to cultures, I think that it's just overemphasized, and there's some very simple principles that determine our direction, and I've laid out what they are. There are the mission,
yeah,
and the subsidiary mission of disruption, and then there are the four basic principles around digital, around the Holy Trinity: faster, better, cheaper, and the unitary structure.
So Martin, we've received so many questions already in the Q&A section, so I want to briefly thank all of the people who have written questions there and for all your amazing point of views here in the chat section. Please do continue to write them in the Q&A section. We'll address them a little later on. Some of the many questions that we've received is people asking about your experiences, your learnings, your invaluable lessons over the years. Looking back now, what are some of the things that you're most proud of your time at WPP, for instance, or some of the most important lessons that you've taken with you and now emphasized here in the new chapter of S4 Capital?
Well, that's for others to, think. I mean, I can talk about, what I think were the important, the Saatchi model. I've had three lives, really. The Saatchi model was built around globalization, around Ted Levitt's article in the Harvard Business Review in October, I think it was, in 1983, where he basically said, and he exaggerated to make the point, as he later admitted. We did a reprise of his article in 2003 at Harvard Business School with John Quelch, who was dean of the London Business School, now dean of the business school in Miami, in Florida. And John did a reprise of his article, and the professor was still alive. He sadly died of cancer shortly afterwards, but he did say that he over-egged the point to make his point. He said basically the thesis of the article was that consumers would consume everything in the same way everywhere, and that was sort of a eureka moment for Morris Saatchi and indeed myself at Saatchi's, and we sort of built Saatchi around them. The brothers Charles and Morris built Saatchi around that premise that globalization was the key. So the first bucket, I mean, just trying to simplify things, the first bucket that I think you think about is geography, which is easier to figure out than technology, certainly for somebody who doesn't speak code. And I think you can figure out the geographical trends. The biggest geographical issue at the moment, I think, is the struggle between the US and China, the bifurcation, the G2 struggle. That, if you look at the world, it's 75 trillion of GDP, and the China is about US is about 24 trillion, and China is about 14. So if it's 75, 38. Almost half of it is in those two countries. And, one little thing, it's just interesting to say, I was on a couple of webinars yesterday, and it is remarkable when you look at China. We're talking about the data that comes out from each country about COVID cases and deaths. And we were having this conversation, and I asked the woman who was compiling the data, what's the data you get from China? And she said, well, it's funny you say that. I was looking at it this morning, and there's only about 12 deaths. And several people on the call said, that's impossible. You've got 1.4 billion people. How is it there are only 12 deaths, right? And I said, well, are you suggesting that the data is fictitious? He said, well, that's the data I have. Well, somebody was listening to the call, who knows a lot about what I've just been talking about. Doesn't matter who it was, but somebody very preeminent. And he'd heard that exchange, and he came on and he said, no, those stats are right. China had this thing under control. So, it is sort of interesting. I make the point in geography, and I make the point because the country that probably is going to benefit most from all this is China. I mean, China, autocratic regime, rigid discipline. There's somebody else on another call was saying today, you travel into China, you're locked up in your hotel room, your key is deactivated for 2 weeks. I mean, there's no nonsense. Now, we may not be prepared to accept that, and quite rightly so, but it just shows you what's going on. So I think 2000 21 is going to be a big year because of GDP bounce and other macro factors, and for S4, some micro factors, account wins, and Euro 21 and Tokyo 21 that will help us. But China is going to do really well, and I think it's really interesting because I think what I see is, bifurcation. We have the G20 coming up this weekend. One hopes that maybe a Biden administration will be a little bit more predictable and multilateral as opposed to a more volatile, unilateral Trump administration, and maybe bring together. I doubt it, because I think the Democrats have a similar view to the Republicans in terms of the relationship with China. But that's the geographical bucket. And that continued at WPP from Sarches, and then continued a little bit in S4, but it's weaker. Then there's the technological bucket, the big technological changes. At Sarches, really, technology did not affect our business. It was very traditional until the time I left in 1985 to start WPP. Around about 1997, at WPP, we started to move very heavily into online. I think probably with benefit of hindsight, didn't move fast enough. You never moved. I think Bill Gates said, you always underestimate the pace of technology, and underestimate. I think a number of people have said that the change, and I would say that that's true. But the second part of WPP was about more globalization in the Ted Levitt sense, but also the rise of technology. S4 is just purely about technology. I mean, the drivers of total shareholder return used to be top line growth and margins. At S4, it is still 75% top line growth. It's not 50-50 and 25% margins. That doesn't mean that we won't focus on margins, and we don't think margins are important. But I think total shareholder return and value, have been conditioned by slightly differently, probably the same parameters, but in different proportions. So the S4 Capital business is purely based around growth. Having struggled for the last few years at WPP with the slowdown that came from the technological changes and its impact on traditional media. Having struggled with that, I wanted to be in a position where we took the view, we're averagely intelligent, and if we're averagely intelligent, I happen to think we're slightly better than that, but if we're averagely intelligent, we should be where the growth is, because you push on an open door, it's going to be easier than pushing on a closed door. And so we're really going where the growth is. So first party data, the application of that to the creation of digital advertising content, and the application of that to digital media, whether it be programmatic or performance, is critically important, in a continuous loop, rather like an election campaign without an election date, not 30-second or 60-second set TV commercials. So the models have been very different. I don't know whether people can draw lessons from that. That's up to them. But all I can tell you is the progression was from pure globalization model to a mixed globalization and technology model to a pure technology model.
So Martin, you've mentioned it a couple of times now that you're focused purely on digital. And when you left WPP, you guys had a revenue of above $20 billion. They don't have that anymore. We're not going to delve into that, but they don't have that anymore. So from your point of view, your perspective, what are some of the things that WPP are doing poorly at the moment, if you can use that term, or at least should be doing less of and then more of this other thing? What would your sort of...
I don't know. It's very difficult for analog companies. A purely digital company, the good news about 2 years ago is I started with a clean sheet of paper. The bad news, I started with a clean sheet of paper. So I had total freedom to focus on the growth areas, and I identified the three I mentioned around data and content and programmatic. The bad news was I didn't have scale. I mean, we had scale. Today, after 2 years or 2 and a bit years, we have revenues of about $500 million, EBITDA margins of after central costs of about 20%. a market cap of $3 billion, and 3,000 people in 30 countries. So, all the threes really. And, so it's worked very well. We have wonderful clients, mainly tech clients, 54%, 55% of our business is tech. So Google, an SDA big technology company, but you can guess who it is, one of probably the most powerful in the world. Thirdly, would be BMW, which is a new win for us in Europe. And fourth would be another packaged goods company that we're building a big relationship with. Again, NDA for the minute. And then the fifth would probably be Facebook. And all of these are significant clients for us. We have this Whopper philosophy, which is we're trying to build a portfolio with 20 concentrated clients, $20 million of revenue each, and we have 5 of those at the moment, or the scope to get to 5 of them, as I just indicated. But we want to get, over the next year, we'll have identified another 5, and then as we get into 22, we'll identify the remaining 10. But, we have a focus. Now, that's our structure. It's difficult to sort of sit and look at WPP because it's changing. I think there's a lot of management by spreadsheet, management by diktat from the center. There's a lot of overhead that's being built at the center, and then at a sub-holding company level, and then an individual agency level. I talk to a lot of people still inside the company, and there's a lot of discontent internally about the weight of the overhead, the structures at the center. Running a global business, it's an interesting thing. I don't think in our business that you can run a business from the UK. The US is still the dominant market, and China, is rapidly becoming the second most dominant market.
And why is that?
Sorry?
And why is that? Is that due to the tech companies?
It's a GDP. Well, it's related to the tech companies, but it's because of GDP.
Yeah.
And advertising is a proportion of GDP. It varies from country to country, but directionally it's the same. And as a country grows, particularly now, there is a distinct correlation between digital advertising spend and GDP growth, the sort of correlation that we saw between traditional advertising and GDP growth in the 1970s and 1980s when I was at Sarches. For every 1% increase in GDP then, ad spend would grow by 1.5% to 2%. Well, you've got a similar correlation at the moment with digital spending. Digital crossed 50% of worldwide advertising spend this year and will go to 70%, according to the analysts in the United States, for example, by 2024. So it'll go from a 50 share to 70% in about 4 years. So that's very strong growth. And next year, it will grow, digital spending will grow by about 20%. This year, it's flat. So it's held its own during the recession. We're up so far this year by 16% and 23% in the quarter, but the industry has been flat. But traditional has gone down by 10 to 50%. And that's the problem that WPP faces. Despite all the noise about digital and simplification, the company is still going backwards. Now, the holding companies will be in a better position in Q2 of next year because they'll be cycling falls of something like 10 to 20% in Q2 of this year. So, at some point in time, it's going to look better. Most observers think that that's more of a dead cat bounce than a true change, but we'll have to see how it shakes out. I think it's impossible for analog companies. And you've got much wiser people on your series than me, and they'll have their views on it. But I think it's impossible for analog companies to change sufficiently quickly in this sort of environment. So the best thing to do, you've got Jeff Immelt following on in your series, and it's be interesting to hear from him what he thinks about conglomerates, because in a sense the ad holdcos are conglomerates, WPP has been around for 33, 34, 35 years. McKinsey have said that, I think, estimated that the average life of an S&P 500 or FTSE 100 company is 17 years. So in that sense, WPP has had almost 2 lives from its start, because it started from zero. So you could argue, it's lived its useful life. My view is it should be broken up. The constituent parts of that business would be better run by good individuals. I mean, some of the people running their businesses are good. Some of the people running their businesses don't know their way to the whatever. I mean, they really don't know what they're doing. And they've been over-promoted far too quickly. And time will tell. I mean, and I'm sure I will be right on that one. Some of the appointments that have been made are lacking in wisdom and lacking in research, the very basic research, the very basic principles of asking people what they thought, or clients what they thought, or colleagues what they thought, or checking the CV carefully would have thrown that up. But so I think there are parts that are good, and there are parts like the curate's egg. But I think overall, the ad holdcos, the model doesn't work anymore. That market share model where brawn is more important than brain doesn't work. Digital is different. When you're buying media in a nanosecond, it's up here that counts, not what's in the muscle. And it's confusion of those two. So I think things are moving so quickly that the best thing with these old models is to break them up and start again, rather than to wrestle with the problems. And of course, one final point on this, where you have a separation of ownership and control, the board of WPP owns nothing in terms of shares in the company. They might spend a little bit of pocket money on the shares if they think they're cheap, but there's nobody. And that issue about separation of ownership and control, I think, is critical. I've always believed that you should have your money where your mouth is. And, I've always disagreed with the fundamental, a lot of people say, don't have your pension with the same company that you earn your salary from. I disagree with that. I think, you should have every time you get up in the morning, your heart should be in your mouth, and you should be motivated to go forward. It shouldn't be a comfortable life. There should be good reasons for wanting to get a move on with things. So sort of divine restlessness, I think, is probably the best state.
Divine restlessness. Well, certainly a very, very interesting point, and it'll be fun to follow in the upcoming years whether your prediction is true or not. Before
a lot of my predictions have been wrong, so
well, it's all hypotheses, right? But very, very interesting nonetheless. Before we delve into more about the future of marketing, we have a very special announcement to make because it's a news that we haven't expressed anywhere else yet. Because not only do we get the pleasure of your invaluable experiences and insights today, but we can also very happily announce that you will be attending the Presidents Summit on the 7th and 8th of June here in 2021, along with 3,000 plus business leaders. And this has not been announced anywhere yet. And therefore, we want to make it special, and we wanted to make it special for all the people that are tuning in live on this masterclass. And therefore, we want to offer them an opportunity to join us at a reduced discount. So we don't have many tickets left, but we want to make it a special announcement here since you're with us, so Martin.
This is an announcement from our sponsor, very appropriate.
Without drawing attention away from the masterclass, please just do let us know in the chat section if you are interested in a ticket, and somebody from my team will reach out to you afterwards. And it will only be available for as long as the masterclass is live, so only for around 20 minutes or so. Just a free offer here on behalf of welcoming you, Sir Martin. But right before we mentioned this, one of the questions that I saw pop up, and some of the questions that have been coming up here in the Q&A section, is then going back to your point about the struggles at WPP. How would you plan on solving some of these? How would you, I guess you can say, build the WPP?
That's for them to figure out, not for me. I still have my 2%. I think I'm still the largest personal shareholder, so I still have a financial interest in. But I think the easiest way for them to free up value is by breaking the company up. I think it's as simple as that. Now, management who doesn't own much of the company and who depend, for their financial and psychological satisfactions from their position and their salary and their bonus. It was just interesting that the management took their cash bonus in 2020 for 2019 without blinking, which I thought, they failed to pay the shareholders a dividend because of COVID. But the dividend was in respect of 2019. They failed to pay that. On the other hand, they were very quick to pay their own cash bonuses. I think that was wrong. But management is unlikely, because they're so attached to their jobs and their salaries, they're unlikely to give them up. So it's very unlikely that turkeys vote for Christmas, and the management turkey won't vote for a break-up Christmas unless pushed by an activist or by private equity. So I think, just to short circuit the answer to the question, I think electrocution is probably the right way.
Electrocution is probably the right way. Well, in those words, I think we got it covered. So Martin, you've had an incredible career over many, many years. I think plus 40 years in advertising and in this industry. What sort of motivated you to embark on this new journey with S4 Capital? Why not retire and play golf?
Well, no, I think there are probably sort of three reasons for that. The first was, I don't think retirement. And people who've retired, I think, lose sharpness, probably physically and mentally. I think it's important to every day be absorbed and mentally and physically absorbed in what you do. I think that's one thing. Secondly, the alternative around portfolio activity was not something that I particularly liked. I don't think being non-executive director is a particularly rewarding or engaging. It depends, but private equity offers, I think, some interesting opportunities, but it wasn't something that I particularly enjoyed. So I'd like to have something to focus on. And the third thing was, I wanted to prove a point in relation to the growth and development of a digital business. Obviously, at WPP, we had made great strides. I think when I left 2 or 3 years ago, 40% of our business was in the digital area. And I see that in a recent statistic they published, it's still only 40%. So I don't know what they've been doing for the last 2 or 3 years. They claim a lot of progress in digital, but they seem to have gone nowhere in terms of proportion of the business. And they got rid of Kantar, which I think is deconsolidated for those figures. And you would have thought the digital piece of Kantar was probably lower actually than the overall, but be that as it may. So I think what we're trying to do is really focus on those. Well, from a personal point of view, those three things, and we're trying to focus on building a digital-only business.
Yeah, I think I'm looking here at some of the questions, and there are so many admirations to your past and some of the accomplishments that you've made over the years. One of the questions that we've received here from Alexander is he's asking you, dear Sir Martin, what do you believe to be true in business that almost no one agrees with you on? I'll let you have a sip of water on that one.
What do I believe in that nobody or very few people believe in? Well, that stumps me. I can't think of something that is quite contrary. Well, I don't know. My view is, I don't know whether people believe with it. Well, so okay. Here's one thing, perhaps, that some people agree with it, some people don't. And that is, I think, coming back to this unification of ownership and control. I think controlled equity structures, such as on the TV at the moment, Zuckerberg and Dorsey are testifying before the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
And both Zuckerberg and Dorsey, I think it's true in the case of Dorsey and Twitter and his financial platform, that he controls the company, as does Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook. And I think that controlled structures, which are antithetical to corporate governance, so it doesn't tick the box from a corporate governance point of view, that the control of a company, that Tesla or Google, should be controlled by one or two individuals. Now, obviously, if you have a lunatic in control, you have a problem. Yeah. But my view is, I think the central issue for the firm is that separation issue. And I'm very heavily influenced by a book I read at Cambridge where I was trying to study economics by Robin Maris called The Theory of Managerial Capitalism. And in that point, he pointed out that there is a separation of ownership and control inside the large corporation. And that is the fundamental problem, that management becomes more concerned about their jobs and their management empires than the good of the firm in the end. And I think the way you square that circle is by management having a large chunk of stock in the company. I remember Jorge Lehmann of 3G saying that at a seminar, that he didn't believe in corporate governance, but he believed in the best form of corporate governance was management having significant equity interest in the company, and that unified it. Now, taking that one step further, it's for management to control the company with that holding. Yeah. So I am pretty sure that Mark Zuckerberg is going to be acting or Larry and Sergey at Google are going to act in the best long-term interests of Google and Facebook. That they are not going to do that Jeff Bezos at Amazon, that Elon Musk at Tesla are not going to do necessarily the thing that is the most expedient in the short term, but they're going to do the thing that is most valuable for the long term. And so that is, to answer the question, I was, he said his name was Alex. That is the answer, I think, to Alex. So that now, not everybody believes that. Certainly, the corporate governance people inside the big institutional investors do not agree with that. But I think that's fundamentally wrong. And, private equity, I think private equity doesn't take a long enough view. It's too short-term focused. It's, average hold period is 4 or 5 years, and they churn investments between one another. There's a very interesting guy called Jeremy Collar who's built Collar Capital. It's a very substantial private equity fund. And originally, I don't think it's still true to the extent it was, he bought the back ends of successful PE deals. So if a PE company had a successful deal for 3 or 4 years and was making a very good rate of return, he would buy the back end of those deals, years 4, 5 and going on. I think he certainly had, and I think he still has, one of the highest rates of return in the PE industry because he bought the back ends of these deals. It was sort of interesting little addition to it. So private equity is very successful. I'm not sure they take a long enough view. They're almost trying to figure out how they get out before they get in. So I'm not sure that they are the solution, but I think that long-term structure where the entrepreneurs who built these businesses remain in control and can afford to take a short-term hit for long-term gain because they believe it's in the interest of the business. I think that's a good thing.
So I'm assuming that is something that you focus quite extensively on at S4 Capital as well, sharing
we have a similar structure. Yeah. We're a standard listing on the London Stock Exchange. Mm-hmm. If we wanted to move to a premium listing, we probably would have to drop that structure in order to qualify. But you probably disqualify yourself in terms of premium listing by about 15% of the market. So it's not too big. And I think we have sufficient pools of investment investment funds in the US and Europe and Asia and elsewhere to satisfy the demand for our stock.
Yeah. Well, so Martin, being cautious of time here, we unfortunately only have 10 minutes left, and we'll have to wait until June, and then we can continue the discussion. But knowing that, if you were to sort of sum up, just in your own words, if you were to recommend all these people on this masterclass what they should do tomorrow to really, get a kickstart on the future of marketing, to build this new age, new era advertising and marketing services model, what would any of your advice then be for them?
Well, the areas that we're focused on are first-party data, which has been thrown into sharp relief by what Google is doing around third-party cookies or nixing them. What Apple is doing in relation to its hardware in relation to privacy. So first-party data becomes critically important. So understanding within your companies or your future companies what the first-party data is, where it lies, how you can, how can effortlessly compare data from one part of the organization to the other. So, often the companies are built not just, even when they grow organically, they have different systems. Different IT people, CMO, don't worry too much about compatibility. So, making first-party data sources compatible and developing them is critically important. So that's number one. Number two, taking back control of marketing, because what happened after 2008 and 2009 and the great financial crisis is because of the pressure on costs, there was a lot of outsourcing of responsibility. And in a 24/7 always-on digital environment, you had to have more control. So rather like the Brexit voter who took back control from Brussels, certainly in the UK, I think marketeers have to take back control in relation to what they're doing and how they do it, whether it be on the data side, or on the content side, or indeed on the programmatic side. So I think that's sort of a second thing they do. And sort of generally, I think you have to think about agility. I mean, I think the third area to think about, apart from first-party data and that take back control, is about agility. So agility is the key corporate attribute. If you look at COVID, the companies that succeeded, we pivoted in the last 2 weeks. For example, on the content side of our business, we pivoted in the last 2 weeks of March and maybe the first couple of weeks in April to 3 robotic production, animation, which went vertical, almost like when we saw the announcements of the vaccines in the stock market, went vertical. And then last but not least, converting live events to online events, right, like we're doing here. So those 3 things really were terribly important in terms of what we were doing and how we were doing them. So making those changes. So I think those are the sorts of things that people listening to this, agility, I think, is the key corporate attribute. In a volatile and uncertain world, in a VUCA world, as they called it, as Paul Polman used to call it in relation to Unilever, his term as CEO of Unilever. I think agility and adaptability are really critically key.
And we've seen it this year more than probably ever, right? Or at least in the past 10 years or so, given all the circumstances that has been around this 2020 year.
I don't think there was much new that COVID-19 actually brought. In the end, what COVID did, or what COVID has done and is doing and will do, because I think we're going to have a very difficult winter, but I think come the spring, I'm talking about the Northern Hemisphere now.
Yeah.
So come the winter in the Southern Hemisphere, I think things will get much, much better. And I think the vaccines, obviously, are extremely important in this context. So, I feel that what we've seen in COVID is, whether it be remote working or working from home or flexible commuting times or worry about congestion in cities or all of these issues were issues that existed before COVID-19. What COVID-19 has done is accelerate them, and COVID-19 has accelerated change at consumer level, accelerated change within the media industry, for newspapers and magazines, and for free-to-air TV and traditional outdoor, the streamers, and the changes that have been driven by COVID have just been accelerated. And last, if you're running an enterprise, the most important challenge you face is digital transformation and digital disruption. And what COVID-19 has said, we'll take no prisoners. So you get on with it. The status quo has been disturbed. There's nothing, there's no point now in preserving the status quo. There used to be a point because you had steady GDP growth. You saw, very little inflation, very little pricing power. So focus on cost, buy back stock, and you could grow your EPS by 0 to 5 or 5 to 10%. That was perfectly respectable for the average CEO of a major listed corporation who lasted for 5 years. That was a good legacy. COVID-19 blew a hole in that. And now the premium is on agility, response, and dealing with the issues as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. And I think I think you really hit the head on the nail there. And I hope that all of you took as extensive notes as I did. So Martin, it certainly has been a humongous pleasure welcoming you. I know you're sitting about 500 meters across the park from me. So was it not for COVID, we would probably have done it in face as well, but we'll have to wait with that until June. Before rounding off completely, we have this brief little lightning round with a couple of top of mind questions. So if you're ready, I want to ask you if you would be up for these quick little lightning round questions before rounding off.
We'll try.
Perfect. The first one will come up here. What is the best advice that you have ever received?
For my father, find an industry you enjoy, find a company within that industry you enjoy, build a reputation. If you fancy doing something on your own, go ahead.
That's very straightforward. Absolutely. Perfect. Second question will be greatest purchase below $200.
Whoa. Greatest purchase below $200. Well, I think the things I were given that were valuable, a letter my father wrote to me, which was extremely valuable, way in value, way before 200 billion. But no, I can't think of anything that I purchased below $200. that thing. So stumped, I'm afraid.
All right, we'll keep that tension until Presidents Summit. Then you'll have an answer from me in 6 months' time. I hope that's right.
I doubt it, actually.
Fantastic. Third question will be most inspiring person at the moment, not necessarily all time, but just currently.
Well, I think you've got to, I'll give you a few. I mean, Bezos and Musk, I think, must be the either or. I mean, this morning Amazon goes into the pharmacy business, and Tesla goes into the S&P 500. So I would say that from a business point of view, obviously they're extremely inspiring.
Yeah, well, I think that's a pretty safe choice right there. Fourth question will be best routine or hobby during COVID-19, besides from stop work.
Housework.
Housework.
Cleaning up. Yes, cleaning up.
Cleaning up. That is your best routine or hobby.
Yes.
Well, I'll someday tell that to my kids that that was your best advice during this global pandemic.
Yeah, or being on the barbecue. In the summer, it was in the barbecue. Yeah, that's right. Or grilling on the barbecue. Yeah, go on.
We'll do some grilling at Presidents Summit once it's summertime again. So Martin, the masterclass has now lasted an hour. I know you're extremely busy, so I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this masterclass. I really look forward to meeting you in person in June. And if there's anything I can be of help with in the meantime, please do let me know.
If anybody wants to have a dialogue on this or any other subject, martin@s4capital.com. All right?
You heard it here. Perfect. So Martin, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Very well.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Bye-bye.